Let's get real. The 1960s was a wild time for animation, where network censors were asleep at the wheel and cartoonists seemed to be on another planet. Some of these cartoons didn't just push the boundaries, they launched them into outer space. Have you ever wondered what happens when grown-ups make TV for kids with zero rules? Stick around, because what you're about to see will make even modern cartoons look tame by comparison. Ready to get weird? Rocket Robin Hood. If you think the wildest thing Robin Hood ever did was rob the rich, you haven't met his 1960s Canadian cousin, Rocket Robin Hood. Forget the green tights and medieval forests. This version ditches Sherwood for outer space, setting the legend 1,000 years in the future and throwing every scrap of logic out the nearest airlock. Right from the first episode, you know you're not in Kansas anymore. Robin and his merry men pilot rocket ships, fight intergalactic crime, and tackle villains who make Saturday morning TV's usual bad guys look positively normal. But here's where it gets stranger. Rocket Robin's band includes not only Friar Tuck and Little John, now decked out in futuristic armor, but also a telepathic walrus, and at one point, a robot who only communicates in riddles and haikus. The animation is so choppy it borders on hypnotic, sometimes recycling the same 2 frames for a full minute, while the voice actors chew scenery like it's their last meal. And then there are the stories. Plots unravel like fever dreams. One week, Robin's solving a crisis by reversing the polarity of imagination. The next, he's battling a villain whose master plan involves singing the square root of purple. Writers experimented with stream-of-consciousness storytelling, thinking kids would appreciate non-linear adventures. Instead, teachers started complaining that their students were answering math questions by quoting Robin Hood. "Math is just frozen music," one third grader declared. Parents were baffled, while some kids became obsessed, walking around muttering lines about cosmic consciousness. By the late 1960s, even network executives realized they'd gone too far. American and Canadian stations quietly pulled the show after a flood of parent complaints. Still, Rocket Robin Hood never really disappeared. Bootleg copies are passed around by animation collectors who love its unhinged energy. In a world where most cartoons play it safe, Rocket Robin Hood stands as a monument to what happens when you let artists get a little too creative and forget to ask, does this make sense? The Beatles. Take the Beatles, swap guitars for paws, and you get the Beagles, the 1966 cartoon that tried to cash in on Beatlemania and wound up in the Cartoon Hall of Oddities. Picture this. 2 dogs named Stringer and Tubby, dressed in mop-top wigs, forming a rock band that's just a little too familiar. On the surface, it's harmless fun, but take a closer look and things start getting trippy, fast. The Beagles didn't just parody the Beatles' music, they channeled the band's whole vibe, from the British invasion sound to the counterculture weirdness of the time. Most episodes featured Stringer and Tubby wandering into groovy animal clubs, where everyone talked about expanding their minds and swayed to music with suspiciously glazed expressions. It wasn't just subtle winks either. The background was packed with psychedelic patterns, strange colors, and animals talking about getting high on tunes and tripping over their own tails. At first, CBS thought they had a hit. Kids loved the music, and adults recognized the not-so-hidden references. But it didn't take long for parents' groups to catch on. By the 3rd episode, complaints flooded in. Some claimed the cartoon promoted the drug culture sweeping the era. Even more outrage came from religious groups, who called it a gateway to strange behavior. As if that wasn't enough, the real Beatles lawyers stepped in, unhappy that the show's original songs sounded a lot like actual Beatles hits. CBS was suddenly facing legal fire from every direction. After just 1 season, the Beagles vanished. Only 26 episodes were ever made, and most were destroyed in a 1970s vault purge. Today, only a handful survive, owned by a company that doesn't even exist anymore, tied up in legal limbo. Animation collectors still hunt for lost episodes, hoping to piece together this bizarre experiment in musical, psychedelic cartoon history. The Beagles is the perfect example of how the 1960s could turn a simple idea into something unforgettable and, sometimes, totally unexplainable. The Funny Company. Here's a show that started with the best of intentions and crashed harder than an anvil in a Looney Tunes short. The Funny Company hit the air in 1963, proudly announcing itself as a cartoon about kids from all backgrounds working together. The problem? Every background was a walking, talking stereotype so blunt it could have been written by aliens trying to guess what humans were like. You had Jasper, the African-American kid who spoke only in rhyme and was obsessed with watermelon. There was Pterodactyl, a prehistoric bird with an over-the-top Mexican accent who mostly wanted to take naps. And Mary Twitter, the shy Asian girl, was written to giggle, bow, and solve math problems on command. The writers thought they were being progressive. Instead, they ended up recycling every cliché in the book. And it got worse. The show doubled down with educational segments about world cultures, each more jaw-dropping than the last. The Africa episode was full of mud huts and tribal dancing, while the Mexico episode was all sombreros and donkeys. The Asian segment, dragons, fortune cookies, and not much else. The intention may have been harmony, but the effect was the exact opposite. By episode 5, the NAACP, Congress of Racial Equality, and Jewish advocacy groups were all protesting. Stations in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles dropped it faster than you could say, bad idea. Ironically, some southern stations kept airing it, seemingly missing the point entirely. The final nail came when the show tried a very special episode about tolerance. Instead of teaching kids to respect each other, it accidentally reinforced every negative trait it had already put on screen. Audiences recoiled, and CBS yanked the plug before the season even ended. The creator defended the show until his dying day, claiming it was all about unity. History remembers The Funny Company as a cautionary tale. Just because you want to do good doesn't mean you're actually helping. Sometimes the road to TV disaster is paved with the best intentions and a stunning lack of self-awareness. Courageous Cat and Minute Mouse. When Batman's co-creator Bob Kane set out to parody his own superhero, he didn't just take the gloves off, he tossed the whole rulebook out the window. Courageous Cat and Minute Mouse exploded onto screens in 1960, starring a caped cat and his tiny sidekick who patrolled Empire City with gadgets that made James Bond look under-equipped. Sounds fun, right? Except this show was less lighthearted spoof and more animated fever dream. Every episode opened with Courageous Cat taking on bad guys with his cat gun. Not a fun gadget, but an actual firearm that fired everything from smoke bombs to freezing ice bullets. It was wildly violent for its time. Bones were broken, villains were battered, and you'd see enough on-screen injury to make a modern parent hit the panic button. Kids loved it naturally, and immediately started making their own cat guns out of anything they could find. The show's sense of justice? Let's just say it had a unique take. Courageous Cat often caused more destruction than the villains, flattening buildings to catch purse snatchers and risking civilian lives for a dramatic entrance. Sometimes he'd defeat criminals only for things to get even worse, leaving Empire City a mess of smoke and chaos. But the real reason Courageous Cat became infamous? Moral ambiguity. Unlike most 1960s heroes, he didn't always save the day for the right reasons. He was arrogant, often reckless, and sometimes seemed to enjoy his power a little too much. Some episodes included inside jokes about the comic book industry, references kids wouldn't get, but that left adults and censors wondering who this show was really for. Parents protested, teachers complained, and broadcasters quickly realized they'd let something loose they couldn't control. Courageous Cat's reign was short but unforgettable, a tornado of slapstick, violence, and questionable morals. Today, it stands as proof that even kids' cartoons can get lost in the fun and forget where the line is supposed to be. If Batman's dark, courageous cat was pure chaos, with a smile. Sinbad Jr. and his magic belt. When Hanna-Barbera launched Sinbad Jr. and his magic belt in 1965, it looked like a guaranteed Saturday morning hit. Take a legendary hero, throw in a magic belt that grants super strength, and send him on adventures with his wisecracking parrot pal, Salty. But somewhere between concept and execution, the show took a nosedive into a pile of cultural landmines. Sinbad Jr. wasn't battling pirates in ancient times. He was cruising through a modern Middle East, where camels and cars shared the road, and cities were a mashup of fantasy and outdated stereotypes. The show's attempt to be global ended up as a showcase for every lazy trope in the book. Characters wore turbans and robes while using space-age gadgets. Accents were caricatured to the point of parody, and the writers invented fictional countries meant to avoid offending real ones. But these places always ended up being backwards, mysterious, or outright hostile. The real trouble started when advocacy groups and international audiences saw the show. Arab American organizations called out the cartoon for reinforcing negative stereotypes just as real-world tensions in the region were hitting the news. Letters poured in, boycotts and sponsor protests followed. Even the U.S. State Department got involved, worried the cartoon was actually damaging foreign relations. Hanna-Barbera tried a desperate pivot, quickly rebranding Sinbad's world as pure fantasy. It was too late. Stations yanked it, and international protests grew louder. In an effort to erase the controversy, Hanna-Barbera even denied the show ever existed for years. Today, episodes are almost impossible to find, buried deeper than most network failures. Sinbad Jr. and his magic belt is a masterclass in what can go wrong when you take real cultures, toss in a few magic tricks, and think nobody will notice the difference. In the history of 1960s cartoons, it's less a hidden gem and more a warning label. Approach with caution, and remember that global doesn't always mean good. The Adventures of Pow-Wow. If you're looking for a cartoon that could make every modern animator cringe, look no further than The Adventures of Pow-Wow. This syndicated short from the late 1950s and early 1960s set out to introduce young viewers to Native American life. The result? A crash course in how not to represent a culture on television. The show followed Pow-Wow, a young Native American boy, as he wandered the Old West on a quest to help his tribe. Right off the bat, the problems start. Pow-Wow speaks in broken English, living in a teepee, and sporting a mishmash of clothing that pulls from every Native stereotype imaginable. His tribe worships the Great Spirit, and every episode is a parade of totem poles, headdresses, and made-up Indian wisdom. Sometimes he solves problems by talking to animals or interpreting smoke signals. Other times he learns ancient lessons that make absolutely no sense. But the real kicker was the so-called educational content wedged between stories. These segments taught facts about Native American cultures that were just made up. Kids learned that all Native people lived in teepees, had no written language, and shared the same traditions coast to coast. The intent may have been to teach, but the actual result was a tidal wave of misinformation. Native American advocacy groups were on this show from day one. Letters, protests, and eventually even the Bureau of Indian Affairs got involved, condemning Pow-Wow as damaging and demeaning. The controversy picked up steam when Native American veterans joined in, pointing out the insult after serving their country in wartime. Networks started pulling the show, but some stations, especially in rural areas, kept airing it for years. Today, The Adventures of Pow-Wow is less a piece of cartoon nostalgia and more a textbook case of what not to do. Its legacy is a painful reminder that representation isn't just about who gets on screen, but how they're shown and how badly things can go when no one's paying attention. Batfink. Meet the superhero bat whose wings of steel couldn't shield him from controversy, Batfink. Debuting in 1966, Batfink looked, at first glance, like a harmless spoof on Batman, a metal-winged bat with a catchphrase and a sidekick named Karate. But just beneath the caped surface, this cartoon was loaded with more red flags than a villain's lair. Batfink's main nemesis, Hugo Agogo, was drawn from every Cold War stereotype imaginable, a mad scientist whose mannerisms were a cocktail of vague European and Asian cliches. Then there's Karate, Batfink's loyal friend. His name tells you everything. The character was an Asian sidekick voiced with exaggerated broken English, endless bowing, and endless martial arts jokes. If it's a cringy stereotype, Batfink ran with it. But Batfink wasn't just problematic in its characters. It also played with dangerous themes. One infamous episode, The Atom Boom, made jokes about nuclear warfare at a time when kids were literally practicing duck and cover drills at school. For a show aimed at children, Batfink seemed weirdly comfortable poking fun at real-world dangers. By 1967, the complaints were coming in fast. Parent groups called it culturally insensitive, and NBC affiliates on both coasts began dropping episodes, especially those with karate front and center. The pressure only built when advocacy organizations started keeping tabs on what their kids were watching. Pretty soon, most major markets had yanked Batfink entirely. Today, finding a full episode of Batfink is nearly impossible. Most prints were either destroyed or locked away, a fate shared by more than a few 1960s "what were they thinking" cartoons. Batfink's one lasting legacy, his metallic wings, the most original part of his character, got recycled for later, less controversial shows. In the end, Batfink is the perfect example of the 60s approach to anything-goes storytelling, bold, brash, and blissfully unaware of the storm it was creating. The show's buried now, but the lessons linger. Superheroes need more than a good gimmick to survive the test of time. Hot Wheels. On paper, Hot Wheels was a no-brainer. Mattel's die-cast cars were flying off toy store shelves, so why not give kids a cartoon that brought the toys to life? In 1969, Hot Wheels sped onto Saturday mornings, only to crash straight into a wall of controversy so big it changed TV rules forever. The show followed Jack Wheeler and his pals, who raced their custom cars through wild stunts, wild mysteries, and endless lessons about automotive safety. But here's the twist. Every car on screen was also for sale, and every new episode just happened to feature the exact models arriving at your local toy aisle. Kids watched the cartoon, ran to the store, and parents started to wonder, was this really a show or just one long commercial? It didn't take long for the grown-ups to connect the dots. Advocacy groups bombarded the FCC with thousands of complaints, calling the show manipulative, sneaky, and basically a 30-minute toy ad. Hot Wheels creators claimed it was entertainment first, toys second, but a whistleblower at Mattel revealed internal memos proving the show was designed to sell toys down to the last episode. The term narrative vehicle for product placement even showed up in the script meetings. Even as ABC tried damage control, adding disclaimers and educational content, no one was fooled. Competitors like Matchbox and Johnny Lightning saw a chance to take down the big dog. They lobbied regulators, saying Mattel was getting free advertising on the public airwaves. In 1971, the FCC finally stepped in, ruling that Hot Wheels violated children's programming rules. The network was fined, Mattel was banned from making TV content for years, and a new wave of regulation slammed down across the industry. Ironically, the controversy only made Hot Wheels toys more popular. Kids wanted what they couldn't watch. But the show became a case study for media students and marketing execs, proof that sometimes being too obvious about your motives is the fastest way to the cartoon graveyard. Hot Wheels didn't just crash, it changed the road for everyone who came after. Dodo, the kid from outer space. If you've ever wondered what happens when a cartoon tries to teach kids about science but ends up warping their entire sense of reality, look no further than Dodo, the kid from outer space. Imported from Britain and broadcast in the US during the mid-1960s, Dodo is technically a Martian, but after a few episodes, you'll start to question what planet the creators were from. Dodo looks like a tiny alien with giant eyes, and he lands on Earth to learn about human life. So far, so standard. But instead of simple adventures, each episode spirals into the bizarre. Dodo solves everyday problems with gadgets straight out of a fever dream. Anti-gravity umbrellas, reality-warping ray guns, and machines that can clone your pet, just because. The scripts swing from oddball science lessons to total surrealism. And more than one story ends with Dodo fixing a problem by literally rewriting the laws of physics. Parents expected harmless sci-fi fun. What they got were hyperactive visuals, relentless sound effects, and stories that looped back on themselves like a Mobius strip. Teachers even started calling the show psychedelic propaganda. Worried kids would leave class convinced Martians were hiding in the cafeteria. As the show got weirder, its cult status grew. Kids either loved it or were completely confused, while parents traded rumors about hidden messages and subliminal effects. The network quietly pulled it after a few years, but Dodo's reputation as one of the strangest educational cartoons of the decade only grew. Today, Dodo, the kid from outer space, survives as a collector's curiosity, a cosmic reminder that when it comes to children's animation, sometimes the lessons aren't the ones you plan to teach. The Mighty Heroes. If you think superheroes have to be cool, poised, and heroic, the Mighty Heroes will shatter every expectation and probably your nerves. Dreamed up by the legendary Ralph Bakshi in 1966, this series assembled the weirdest team ever to stumble through saving the day. Diaper Man, a baby with a bottle, Rope Man, Strong Man, Tornado Man, and Cuckoo Man. Each one is as hopelessly incompetent as the next. The premise is simple. Whenever the city of Good Haven is in trouble, the Mighty Heroes answer the call. Unfortunately, their solutions usually cause even bigger problems. Rope Man gets tied in knots. Cuckoo Man can't fly straight. Strong Man punches holes through everything except the villain. Episodes quickly devolve into slapstick chaos, with the heroes rescuing themselves from their own disasters just as often as they stop the bad guys. What really makes this show strange is the pacing. It's frenetic, relentless, and almost exhausting. Characters yell over each other, plots spin out of control, and animation shortcuts lead to hilariously weird visuals. Bakshi's trademark style is everywhere. Wild faces, warped backgrounds, and jokes that slide right up to the edge of what's acceptable for kids. Parents were split. Some loved the anarchy. Others hated how the show rewarded bumbling instead of bravery. Educators worried that kids would imitate the heroes' antics, and TV watchdogs wondered if the show was actually parodying children's television itself. Ratings fell as quickly as they rose, and after just one season, the mighty heroes disappeared. Despite its short run, the show built a devoted following. Bakshi himself would go on to create some of the most controversial animation of the 70s and 80s, but The Mighty Heroes remains a prime example of how the 1960s took every superhero trope, twisted it, and left audiences wondering what on earth they'd just watched. Space Angel. Before motion capture, before digital lip sync, there was Space Angel, the cartoon that took weird to a whole new level. Broadcast from 1962 to 1964, Space Angel was a space adventure series with a twist. Instead of animating character mouths, producers used synchrovox. That meant pasting real human lips over static cartoon faces. The result was so uncanny that some kids refused to watch it alone. Set aboard the spaceship Starduster, the show followed Scott McCloud, aka Space Angel, as he battled cosmic threats with his crew. The scripts were classic space opera, time travel, robot uprisings, and intergalactic espionage. But no one remembers the plots. What stuck with everyone was those floating, disembodied human mouths, talking on top of motionless drawings. At times, it looked less like a cartoon and more like a deep space fever dream. Parents found it odd, kids found it hilarious or terrifying, and critics couldn't decide if it was cutting edge or just plain lazy. Space Angel became famous for synchrovox nightmares, with some viewers swearing the lips followed them even after they switched off the TV. Still, there was something fascinating about the show. The music was groovy, the ships were cool, and the villains were as over the top as you'd hope. The series only lasted 2 years, but its legacy lives on among animation fans and meme makers alike. Space Angel stands as a monument to a time when TV was willing to try just about anything, even if it left its audience scratching their heads. Want proof that the 1960s were the golden age of animated oddities? Just look at a single frame from Space Angel and see if you can sleep afterwards. Tennessee Tuxedo and his tails. What do you get when you mix a fast-talking penguin, a bumbling walrus, and some of the most convoluted educational schemes ever to air on TV? Welcome to Tennessee Tuxedo and His Tales, a show that turned after-school learning into a roller coaster of confusion. Premiering in 1963, Tennessee Tuxedo followed the adventures of Tennessee, a clever, city-wise penguin, and his best friend Chumley, a walrus with more enthusiasm than brains. The two were forever escaping from the Megapolis Zoo and running headfirst into the wildest get-rich-quick plans you've ever seen. Their inventions were always a little too advanced for a cartoon. Rocket cars, mind control hats, and supercomputers powered by who knows what. But here's where things got weird. Each episode featured Professor Whoopi, who'd show up to explain the science behind Tennessee's latest disaster using a chalkboard and a cloud of pure chaos. The lessons were technically accurate, but presented with so much information, strange metaphors, and breakneck pacing that even adults found themselves scratching their heads. The show meant well, but some viewers joked that it took a degree just to understand the basics. Beyond the over-the-top science, Tennessee Tuxedo became infamous for its surreal humor and relentless optimism. Tennessee was the eternal fast talker, always convinced his latest idea would work. Chumley, loyal as ever, never figured out what was happening but followed along for the ride. The supporting cast included Stanley Livingston, the zoo's uptight director, and Flunky, the zookeeper, who usually ended up chasing the duo around town. Despite the confusion, the show was a hit. Kids loved the wild inventions and slapstick escapes, even if the science sometimes flew straight over their heads. Tennessee Tuxedo's greatest trick was turning even the dullest school subject into a carnival ride of noise, mishaps, and frantic energy. Today, it's remembered as one of the strangest educational cartoons ever made, proof that in the 1960s, you never knew if a cartoon would leave you smarter or just completely bewildered. So, which of these mind-bending, logic-defying relics did you survive? Or have your parents warned you about their weirdness? The 1960s weren't just a different time. They were a different universe for cartoons, and some of these experiments still echo in pop culture's strangest corners. Got your own bizarre cartoon memory? Drop it in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into animation's untold stories. Trust me, there's always weirder out there.